Computer. Well, thank you this afternoon for taking some time to talk about the 2023 Streets and Recreation Facility Funding discussion that the council will be reviewing this evening. Real quickly, we've got on the agenda, we'll touch base on the two funding issues. One is the special recreation tax and the 2032 sunset, and the road funding shortage, and why we can't just make that up with budget cuts, and then what the potential solution is for that that council will be reviewing this evening. So with that, I'll just start in on special recreation tax. So as you might be aware, on May 8th, 2007, the voters overwhelmingly approved a ballot initiative of 1% sales tax to build the pool, the rink, and a commitment of $1 million toward the trail system. That commitment was met in $100,000 increments by 2014. So those three pieces have been met, and then that fourth bullet point allows other recreation improvements. The issue is that the tax rate decreases from 1% to 0.25% in 9 years, July 1st of 2032. That 1% tax generates about $2.5 million, and 25% of that, which will remain after the sunset, is for maintenance of the pool and the rink. That will stay beyond 2032 and was originally intended to fund the operations and maintenance of those facilities. It also currently pays for repayment of the bonds that finance the construction of the pool and the rink. That is a non-issue because the $467,000 that we spend each year for that will go away also in 2032. This is the issue. Currently, we're sending $335,000 to the community center and $140,000 to the ice rink every year to help support ongoing operations and maintenance, just to keep those facilities running. This part will go away in 2032, and it's about a 0.2 of a sales tax that we still need to fund those the way we're operating them today. And then there's this last bucket. This is an excess that is used for other recreation improvements. This year it's funding softball light replacements, a pavilion at the skate park, a garage at Craner Hill, and it's been used for a variety of park improvements like Sharmar Park, Lazy K Park, the IOF Park, and a variety of other things over the years. In 2017, we started looking at city facilities and operations with the intention that we would fund all of our operations and programs in a sustainable way and make sure that we're not spending beyond our means. And with that, we had a building assessment conducted on all our facilities, and we found that we really need about 0.5% of tax to maintain those recreation facilities that we've already built. So that's double what we thought we would need at that 0.25% rate. And what our intention here is that we have this picture of this trail. We want to make sure it's a good experience when you're using our rec facilities, and we don't want to be walking through a field of ragweed above our head and poor drainage here where you're walking across makeshift bridges as we have flooding across the trails, and make sure that things are in good shape. And so this is certainly an issue. We also have a variety of capital projects that we have planned in the future. Some of those are to replace existing uses like the Craner Hill lift replacement. That's not going to last forever. We also would like to create an add-on to the community center on the north end of the gym box to add recreational facilities like cardiovascular and weight equipment in that facility. And then we'd like to extend some trail connections. One would be great south of the runway to connect W Mountain Ranch over to Hartman's at Gold Basin Road, and also behind Western to connect the Ridge Trail system to the Van Tile trails, perhaps north of the Rock Creek subdivision. There's also intentions to keep the playground equipment in good shape, and fleet replacements is primarily the Zambonis. So over time, this is a chart of the costs for parks and recreation using that 1% tax. And we need to keep that subsidy for the community center or shortage at the community center and ice rink going. And we've got that inflated at about 3% per year as an estimate. And then those capital improvements that I just discussed, once we plug those in, this is the use of those funds. And when we lay our cash balance over this chart, that's that red line, that our cash balance obviously goes up and down. And when we construct something like phase 3, we have a big drop in cash balance, but you can see that we could fund that using cash now, using reserves, or at least in the near future. But the issue is once that tax sunsets in 2032, we have an unsustainable use of funds. In 2037, we've exhausted all those funds that we had set aside, and we're not like the federal government where we can just print more money. We cannot go below 0 on our cash balance. So we've deferred the construction of phase 3. Even if we took that out, we build a higher fund balance, and you can see we can reach almost $8 million in our reserves, but still, once that sunset occurs in 2032, we have an unsustainable use of funds. It defers our shortage until like 2035, but still we're going to run out of money eventually. And what's the implication of that? If we were to fill that shortage with just revenues in terms of user fees at those facilities, you can see that there's a dramatic effect on our rates. So if you're a family paying $365 per year for a membership at the pool, you would suddenly be forced to double your rate. And then we're at $710 per year. And our challenge is that really creates a affordability issue, and the value just probably isn't there. Then you have more people not renewing their memberships, which means you have to further raise the rates for those that remain, which creates a really critical funding issue in the future. It's even worse at the rink at 123% rate changes. So if you're that family paying $100 right now per season, you'd go to $223. And ice rentals at the rinks is the same. So what does that do to hockey in the valley and just regular skating for folks? So any questions on the Parks and Rec before I move on to road funding?
No.
Okay, thank you. Road funding. As you're probably aware, we've had 2 years in a row of running a ballot initiative to support our shortage in streets. And last year, it was just 0.5% that was intended to go for street maintenance. And that was a difference of 281 votes. So 141 people changing their vote to a yes would have changed the outcome of that ballot initiative. So it was a pretty reasonable showing, but it did ultimately fail. One of the key bits of feedback that we got from voters is that people just really aren't interested in a new tax at this time. So we're kind of going back to the drawing board, exploring our options here. But here's the issue that we've encountered over the years. This is a chart of pavement condition on the left-hand side and time on the bottom. And obviously you start out with good roads, and those slowly deteriorate until they are in poor condition unless you intervene and perform some pavement maintenance. A good road is one that's newly paved, nice smooth surface, free of blemishes. A fair road, you're starting to see some cracks develop. It might be a little bit bumpy, more of a rough ride. And then ultimately poor condition, it's deteriorated to the point where potholes are forming, can create safety hazards for both bicyclists and a lot of maintenance issues for vehicles. And that deterioration increases over time. So over the first 40% of pavement life, you may only see a 15% drop in condition, whereas the next 15%, you see a dramatic decline in the condition. And so if you think about this like your car engine, if you get a car and you decide, I'm not going to change the oil, I don't have time, or I don't have the money for that, it's going to run great for a while. But then pretty soon you're going to see a dramatic decline in performance until ultimately your engine blows up and you need to get a new engine. So it's very similar with pavement. And rather than letting your engine blow, it's better and more cost advantageous to change your oil once in a while. So same with the road. If we can crack seal and do some cheaper slurry seals and seal that pavement surface, then that's a lot cheaper than waiting until the road fails. And then we're doing overlays, maybe rebuilding the base layers of the road underneath the pavement, which is 4 times as expensive than if we were to do that preventative maintenance to keep the water out of the surface. This is a progression over time. It's watching pavement deteriorate is a little bit like watching paint dry. It's not something that's fun or really even noticeable. So in 2012, this is the corner of Georgia and Colorado Street. And you can see over the course of time, now that road completely needs to be rebuilt. We can't crack seal that. There's alligator cracking all over the surface here. And no one will even work to maintain that because it's just not useful. At this point, we've got to grind this up and completely rebuild this section of street. And this would be considered a poor street. Right now, in our system, we've got about 13% of poor streets, or our backlog in maintenance. And within 5 years, that builds to about a quarter. And because of the increase in cost that we just talked about, what happens is that you get to a point where you really can't recover from this. You're going to have to choose some streets that you just let go, and over time will be either gravel or dirt surface because we can't maintain those in a paved status. And you might be asking, why did we get this way? How did we get to this point? What has the city been using the money for? Isn't that a basic city service? And the answer is yes, but the issue is the costs have outpaced the revenues that we have that support streets. These are based on bid costs, actual bids since 1997. So this chart tracks those bid costs over 25 years. And just like how you can't buy a soda for a nickel, you would expect cost escalation over 25 years. But usually it's about a doubling of costs every 25 years, which you are seeing with hot mix asphalt. So that's something we would expect. But when we look at some other road costs like road base and roto milling, in some cases it's 4 times as much as you would normally expect with inflation. And when we look at the revenues that support those same costs, sales tax has really kept up. So this green line is sales tax. That's kept up with what you would expect over 25 years, a doubling of costs. Our sales tax revenue has also almost doubled. And the highway user trust, on the other hand, is something that that's your fuel taxes that you pay at the gas pump. That's a flat fee that hasn't been changed since 1993. It's 18.4 cents per gallon. And so that hasn't increased. And we also have fuel efficient vehicles, electric vehicles that are eroding that revenue stream that historically has been used to pay for pavement maintenance and road maintenance. So again, costs have not kept up, or costs have greatly exceeded the revenues that support those costs. This is a great picture of the Palisades subdivision before we did a recent improvement project. And so on a similar snow year as this year, you can see there's a huge amount of water that builds up in the street. And this freezes every night, creates a safety hazard. People trying to stop at this stop sign can run through the stop sign. You also have people trying to walk through that. It's a safety hazard. It's like walking on an ice skating rink. But also this water is getting into the cracks in the road, and then it freezes at night and builds up those potholes over time. This same intersection after our road improvement project with a similar snow year, you can see how now the road properly drains, and you can actually hear the water running under the snow, going into the storm drain and leaving the road surface. So you actually have dry sections of road. And if you can keep this dry, then you have improved safety and you have less freeze thaw cycles that helps you maintain your pavement over time. So this year in 2023, we have just over $1 million dedicated to pavement maintenance. But with a third-party study that we contracted, we have come to the conclusion that we need $2 million per year to maintain that pavement condition index the way it is now, which is a $950,000 deficit each and every year. And that does not include any funding for alleys, sidewalks, or any kind of safety improvements. It's just for maintaining the streets as they are today. And when we started realizing that we were short, we had a pavement maintenance company come through and use laser testing to drive all our streets. And this was the result of that study. Red is bad, so think of potholes and a bad road surface, and green is good on this map. And when we take a look at the system, you can see some areas where there are challenges for sure. You can see that in general, the Palisades subdivision had more poor road systems than the rest of town. Fast forward to today, and you can see we've improved Palisade subdivision with that road construction project that we had, but that took us 3 years to save up enough funds to do this small section of town. And you can see over that same period of time, our road system went from this to this. So this is sort of like your eye doctor chart. Is this one better or is this one? This one is worse. We're definitely losing ground on our road system. And now we're at 13% backlog. If we fast forward another 5 years, the projection is that now we've got pushing 25%. So a quarter of our road system is in this ill repair state, and we just can't keep up. There's areas that improve if you look closely at this chart, but predominantly we see more red in here. And so if we can get additional funding somehow to the tune of about $1 million per year, then those poor roads don't go completely away, but we can start making some headway. We can start putting a stop to the deterioration and moving things forward. And over time, we can get our system back to what we were expecting back in 2018, where relatively most roads that you go on traveling, whether it's bike, walking, or driving, are in good condition. That's the goal. Okay, you might be asking, why can't you just figure this out? The city has a budget of almost $39 million. Figure it out, make some cuts, make some changes, and take care of business. Well, this is a chart of the entire budget as a pie chart with the 17 appropriated funds that the city uses today. And first of all, these pies here are run like businesses. So they're called enterprise funds, and we have to run those like a business. So for instance, the electric fund, all of the electric costs are paid by our electric customers. Some of those aren't even in the city of Gunnison. They might be north of town, and those users are paying fees in exchange for receiving electric service at their home or business. We can't use those funds towards other uses like street improvements. So once you take all of those, electric, water, sewer, trash service, and our fleet repair service, all of those are off the table, bringing our overall budget to 54% or $21 million. If we keep going with this, these pies here are the 1% sales tax for Parks and Rec. Like we talked a little bit earlier, those can only be used for those purposes as approved by the voters. So we cannot use those for street improvements. Those are off the table. Now we're down to 44%. As we step through some of these others, fireman's pension is used for our volunteer firefighter retirement fund. We have marijuana mitigation that must be used for youth prevention or enforcement type activities. Risk management fund is our insurance. We need to have insurance for when unfortunate things happen. Conservation trust dollars are your lottery dollars that must be used for maintenance of public improvement, public recreation sites. And it doesn't make any sense to make cuts to street improvements to get more money for street improvements. So that is also off the table. The ditch fund doesn't have a lot of resources. It really is less than 1% of our total budget. But this is what is remaining that could be used for these funding shortages. And we're really talking about a quarter of the budget. And the general fund, if you try to make cuts in those, you're really cutting parks and police and fire and a lot of essential services that are more difficult to cut than it first might seem. So let's go into a summary of needs here. We've talked about a lot, but the street maintenance deficit of nearly $1 million, we'd like to figure that out. Alley and sidewalk maintenance. Right now, we're not doing much of anything in the alley, and a lot of people use the alley to access their garages and their homes. We also have our trash truck going through there once a week to pick up trash in the alley. And so we'd like to spend some money on maintaining alleys and potentially building some sidewalks on key areas like North Denver or the north side of Denver Avenue, where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, or areas where you're walking on the sidewalk and suddenly entering into the middle of someone's yard. And you're wondering, do I walk across this person's yard or do I jump to the street at this point? So addressing those. Again, we talked about the funding shortages and how critical those are to keep fees at a reasonable rate at the pool and the rink. And then the phase 3 of the community center, we could potentially build that, albeit we wouldn't be able to fund it with cash. We'd have to finance it over about 20 years. And then some of these other projects spread out over time is about $100,000. So this approximate annual cost is about $2.3 million, which equates to almost 1% equivalency of a sales tax. All right, so this is the proposed tax rate the council will be looking at this evening and potentially putting on the ballot for November 7th. And this option is to change the allocation of our sales tax through a responsible restructuring. This top line is where we are currently with our sales tax. So when you go buy something at your favorite store downtown, or buy groceries at Safeway or City Market, DeLuna, you would expect to pay 8.9%. Now, not all of that is the City of Gunnison. Some of it's state of Colorado at 2.9, the county at 1, and the rural regional transportation authority at 1%. So what we're talking about is just the City of Gunnison sales tax at 4%. So 4%, this is our sales tax, and these breakdowns are required by law. We have no discretion on the breakdown. We have to spend 1.8 on the general fund, 0.9 on streets, 0.3 on capital improvements. This is that 1% for Parks and Rec, with 75% of that disappearing after 2032. So this is our current situation. This is what this bottom line is, where we will go if nothing is done. We'll drop to a rate of 3.25%, and that's because the sunset block drops off. All these other allocations would remain exactly the same. So what the proposal is that we're short in streets and we're short on permanent funding in Parks and Rec. So if we could reallocate the existing 4% without an increase in the tax rate, we could have sustainable pathway forward for both streets and our funding for trails, the pool, and the ice rink. And that's the proposed solution. Looking from the Parks and Rec standpoint, their rate right now is at 1%. And in 2032, that's going to drop to 0.25% and continue onward. If we were to adjust that to a 0.63 starting in 2024, it would be a reduction of 0.37 until 2032 in exchange for gaining 0.38 from 2032 onward. And what happens to all the needs that were in here for the next 9 years? Well, this chart helps demonstrate how we plan for that. This green line is cash balance. And this chart has a lot going on, but basically what we're paying for at Parks and Rec is the 25% that will remain. after the sunset for maintenance. We're not changing anything there. These are some of those other capital expenditures, just things that come up, making sure we keep things in good shape. We have the pool and the rink subsidy that would continue. And currently we're paying for debt service on the pool and the rink. That will go away in 2032. And we have this amount for senior programming as well. So over the next 9 years, because we have this large loan payment and we've redirected some of that funding to streets, we're using some of our cash reserves to get through this period of a lot of competition. Then once that debt drops off, we have the opportunity to pick up additional debt here that would potentially fund the construction of the phase 3 of the rec center. And at that point, even with that loan payment, you can see we have a sustainable cash balance, and we've stabilized and moved forward without this unsustainable use of funds. And as we go about a summary, think of this as a pro and con list. There's good things and there's bad things about this. The best thing about it is that when we look at the ballot language, it will lead in with without an increase in the tax rate. So that's listening to the voters about no more new taxes. It also takes that 0.75 that would go away and puts it toward that 0.95% of needs. So it doesn't quite fund everything, but it uses that sunsetting amount to fund a lot of it. Gets us within striking distance of addressing those issues. The big issues of streets and the pool and the rink funding, it deals with the recreation and the street aspects all at one point, and addresses those right now. It adjusts the percentages to fund our current needs within the amount of revenue generated. So you can think of this as living within our means. At your own house, you would adjust your budget. If you had an increase in costs, you might get rid of some discretionary things like your Netflix in order to pay for your mortgage or something. Well, at the City of Gunnison, we are handcuffed with those allocations and we can't adjust them. So we need voter intervention to make those adjustments. We also have this strategy is endorsed by the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. On the negative side, obviously it doesn't quite meet all the needs. It gets us really close. So we're either going to have to really tighten our budgets and sharpen our pencils and figure out some funding cuts, or we just don't meet some of those needs. And maybe it's something like sidewalks. If we can't maintain what we've got now, maybe we don't build anything new. So that's an ongoing discussion. And for the next 9 years, there's a lot of needs for that funding. And especially until the debt is paid off, the pool and the rink, we're eating into our fund balance for 9 years, but we feel like we can pull that off. And then this is also a redirection of some of the voter approved recreation funds. An advocate for Parks and Rec could say, you know, I wanted that whole 1% to go there to Parks and Rec activities until 2032. End of story. And we feel like this is a trade-off. Yes, you're losing that 0.37 for 9 years, but in exchange for gaining 0.38 from there on out. How do you get involved? I'm not here to advocate, obviously, for or against this. I'm just staff working for the city. So this is a factual presentation. It's not to urge anyone to vote one way or the other. But if you had a position that you'd like to take on this, sending a letter to the editor in that October timeframe. Mail-in ballots are mailed in October. Obviously, the election is November 7th. So you could send a letter to the editor in support of or opposed to the ballot measure. You also, depending on what you're doing, if you're a member of a professional organization or so forth, you can send correspondence to your membership, sharing information about a position of support or opposition to the ballot measure. If you're an individual, that could be letting your friends and family know what your position is on this. You also could form a political action committee. We can't do that from the city's perspective because our sign would, our yard signs that we put out would say vote no or vote yes on this ballot initiative, which is a little bit awkward. But if you had a position for or against this, then you could do something like that, putting up billboards or signs. And that's really it. So the council this evening will be reviewing this, and this is being recorded on Tuesday, August 22nd. And I expect them to put this on the ballot. We'll see. It's not official until they certify that over to the city clerk. But we expect that action to occur this evening. So any other questions on this? It's a lot of complicated information. I know this took about 30 minutes to run through, but there's a lot of moving parts. It's an attempt to address voter sentiment on having no new taxes and trying to live within our means and try to address a couple of critical funding issues. So, questions?
No questions.
No, thank you.
All right, great. Well, thanks for your time, and we'll see what happens this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.